is to be able to attract science and technology global-based companies to set up shop here. And that is really key in terms of developing the science and technology innovation ecosystem in the country.
Particularly because there's that deep desire. And what PAASE does and can do more of is to promote this relationship between its members.
We really need to ratchet up the appreciation, the recognition of the importance of science and technology and innovation.
And we are all trying to attain what we call the common good, the greater, higher, long-term good of the Filipino people.
Warm greetings to everyone. On behalf of the PAASE President, Dr. Gisela P. Concepcion, I would like to welcome you all to this online parallel session 8.2 with a theme on environment and atmosphere via Zoom platform. We are also live at http://streaming.uplb.edu.ph. This parallel session is actually part of the 2020 Annual Scientific Meeting of the Philippine American Academy of Science and Engineering, otherwise known as PAASE, which is also celebrating its 40th anniversary. My name is Juan Pulhin. I'm a professor at the University of the Philippines, Los Baños, and I will be your host for this session. My colleague will be assisting me as co-host of the question and answer session in the person of Dr. Dixon Fijebana, a multi-awarded outstanding young scientist, also of the University of the Philippines, Los Baños. We are honored and indeed privileged to have 6 very distinguished speakers in this session located in 4 different parts of the world, 4 countries to be specific. 2 from the United States of America, 1 each from Malaysia and Japan, and 2 from the Philippines. They will be sharing with us cutting-edge researches and pioneering institutional initiatives in the field of environmental and atmospheric sciences. As flashed on the screen, we have divided the presentation into 2 major parts. The first part includes a 30-minute keynote paper to be followed by 2 other presentations covering recent advances in atmospheric sciences. This will be followed by a 15-minute question and answer session. The second part will also involve 3 papers that focus on broader issues on the environment, including long-term monitoring, science communication, and capacity development. This will also be followed by a Q&A session. Before we proceed to the presentation, let me give the floor to my colleague, Dr. Dixon Tihebanya, to explain to us a bit about the Q&A guidelines. Dixon, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. John Paulin. So just briefly, now we'll go over with the Q&A guidelines. Number one, please address your question to a specific presenter by typing them in the Q&A window. If you're following the Zoom, there is a Q&A button there. Just click it and just post your question there. The Secretariat will be collating these questions. Selected questions will be shown on the screen, which will then be read by the host and addressed to a specific presenter. If time will allow, we will entertain live questions through the raise hand button. Please wait for your name to be called in case you raise your hand. And lastly, in case your questions will not be answered during the session time due to time constraint, the Secretariat will take note of your questions and send them through email to the presenters after the parallel session. You will then be contacted by the Secretariat regarding the presenter's response to your question. So looking forward to a productive Q&A session with all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hibanya, for the Q&A guidelines. Now let's proceed to the part one of the presentations, dealing particularly on atmospheric sciences. Our keynote presenter is a very much distinguished scientist, a senior scientist emeritus of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, or NASA, of the United States of America. He is a former senior physical scientist at the Earth Sciences Division of NASA, Goddard Space Flight Center, a former chief scientist in NASA aircraft missions in the Arctic and the Antarctic. He is also a recipient of several NASA awards, including the NASA Exceptional Scientific Achievement Medal and a coordinating lead author of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change on the 2014 Fifth Assessment Report of Working Group 1 contribution to IPCC on a report titled Climate Change 2013, the Physical Science Basis. And if I may add, I was looking at his Google Scholar H index, and probably he has one of the highest H index with an 81 H index, probably one of the highest that a Filipino scientist has ever achieved. So he's really a well-cited author. So it is indeed our pleasure and a great privilege to have our keynote presenter in the person of Dr. Josefino C. Comiso to discuss his topic entitled Anthropogenic CO2, Sources and Impacts on the Environment and Climate. Dr. Comiso, the floor is yours.
Greetings to everybody. First of all, I would like to thank John and the PAASE organizers for inviting me to participate in this session. And thanks for the kind introduction. As one of two seminar speakers a few years ago, the other speaker, who was much younger than me, was introduced as a rising scientist. And I was then introduced as a declining scientist. So I'm glad that I was not introduced the same way today. But I must say that I am still active. I keep my office at NASA as emeritus, and I've continued to publish. And I'm sure that many of my colleagues who are retired can do the same. As indicated by John, my its index actually increased from 67 to 81 just after I retired, and mainly because of papers that I published after retirement. So I'd like to start by looking at showing you some statistics. So the number of babies born worldwide every minute is 250, according to statistics. The number of deaths is 107. So the net increase in population is 143 per minute. And if you do the math, the net population increase is actually around 750 million per decade. Now the population is about 7 billion. So with this increase in population per decade, it's gonna be not long before it can get to be 8 billion. So it's a lot of humans to satisfy. And just to meet the energy needs of this population, there's a need for around 36 billion metric tons of energy in terms of carbon dioxide that is then emitted to the atmosphere. And this is an equivalent to an increase of about 2.5 parts per meter per year. Also, we've been losing about 12 million hectares of tropical forests every year, 4 million of which are primary forests because of the needs of this many population. So just to illustrate visually where the populations are located, this is a nighttime image of the globe, and you can see where activities are going on. In the US, it's mainly in the East Coast and part of California, then Mexico as well. And then in Europe, it's mainly England, France, Spain, and Germany. And then you have the Middle East, India, China, Japan, Korea, and a little bit of light from the Philippines. And I think that's Manila. So if you look at the graph at the bottom, for a long time, the population was a mere 250,000 people globally. And it was not until the year 1500 that it reached something like 1 billion people in population. And at the beginning of the Standard Revolution, when there was also big advances in medical science, then we have this exponential growth that get us into around 7 billion people now. So in 1886, Bante Arrhenius look at the problem of emission of CO2. And he was then observing increasing CO2 in the atmosphere. And he studied this for 2 years and came up with a conclusion that if we double the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere, it would cause an increase in temperature by as much as 4 to 5 degrees. So based on data at that time, he speculated that it would take about 3,000 years for doubling to occur. So in the process, nobody really paid attention to this. And it was only when Charles Keeling started making measurements of CO2 in the atmosphere at Mauna Hawaii that people realized that doubling can occur in a much shorter time. The graph on the right is a manifestation of that. And with a continuation of the plot, then you get a doubling within the century. So at the same time, the surface temperature has been increasing, as shown in the plot at the bottom. And if you look at the plot at the left, there's actually a good agreement or correlation of the increase in CO2 with the increase in temperature, global temperature. So why do we worry about greenhouse gases and CO2 in particular? CO2 is one of the molecules in the atmosphere that has 3 or more atoms. And you need 3 or more atoms in order to meet the required vibrational motion of the molecule. The possibilities for the motion are shown on the right. And the only components in the atmosphere that has 3 or more atoms are CO2, methane, nitrate, and ozone, as well as water vapor, which is actually more abundant than the other 4. But majority of the gas in the atmosphere are actually other types of gases like nitrogen, which is 78% of the atmosphere. Oxygen is 21%, and argon is about 1%. So what issue here is something that everybody is familiar with. We get greenhouse gases as a result of deforestation, CFCs, transportation vehicles, factories, and sources of energy that then burn coal and other fossil fuels. So when the data first came out, it was just a point measurement from Mauna Hawaii. And it has been an issue where all these carbon dioxides are coming from. And this was made possible only recently with the launch of OCO2 satellite on board the ATRN, which also has the Aqua satellite with an Earth sensor. And the Earth sensor is actually able to get the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere, but on a more general basis. So it's only the advent of OCO2 and also a Japanese sensor called GeoSat that we finally are able to pinpoint the location of sources of carbon dioxide. And this is what they call XCO2, because XCO2 is actually the average over a column of carbon dioxide in a certain location. So, for example, if you look at XCO2 in Asia, the ones on the right are the ones with a lot of increases, what we call anomaly in carbon dioxide. And that includes Beijing, Shanghai, and other cities in China. And you can see that South Korea has a lot of contribution as well as Japan. And it's probably Taiwan, and the Philippines is over here. So a more complete analysis was published by Haka Rainen in 2016. And what you see on the top are actually XCO2 in the US. And as you see, much of the sources are in the eastern region. Then you have in Europe and Middle East, as well as Africa. And this is in Asia, and that's where China is, in India, with New Delhi over there. And the Philippines, there's not much over there. It also turned out that the CO2 is also correlated with nitrate, and this is results from OMI of nitrate columns, and you can see that where it's high, it's also the CO2 is also high, and especially in China. And this is emission from CO2 in 2014. It's not as much as what you see on the top, but then you can see that this is just from 1 year of data. So quantitatively, if you look at contributions from the different countries, advanced countries and middle advanced, you can see that the US was contributing the most, but if you look at the curve, it has basically flattened out, and there's not much increase over the years. And in Europe, it's actually declining. Russia is also declining, but there are cases like in India where it's increasing. But the most obvious change is China, where it was number 3 here and started to climb up, and now it's way above the contributions from other countries. So as introduced, I participated in the IPCC report, where I learned a lot about what's going on in terms of the physical basis of climate change. Actually, this was the plenary session where we depended the report after it was written. We have the coordinating authors participating, but all governments of the world were involved as well. And took quite a time before everything was approved. But much of the delay was caused by the fact that there were political statements like the Japan Sea was not considered by the Koreans as Japan Sea. They wanted to be called the East Sea. So it's mainly political. So this was the cover of the book. And the main results are shown on the right. The fact that the globe, there's global warming going on, as indicated on the right, it's an anomaly map. And the sources of warming can be pinned down to the other parameters below. One can be changing contribution from the sun. Every now and then we get sunspots, and the orbital parameter of the Earth changes with time as well. But this is a direct measurement of contribution from the sun, and you don't see anything much in terms of changes at the time when temperature was changing. The other one is volcanic eruption. So for this to be consistent with the trend in temperature, you'd have to have a lot more volcanic eruption on the left and hardly any on the right. But what you see here in 1992 is the effect of Pinatubo, where you normally have a cooling for about 1 or 2 years. And in terms of interannual variability, these are contributions by various phenomena like El Nino, or the Arctic oscillation, or Pacific decadal oscillation. And what you see here is basically a new trend as well. So the only one with a trend that's comparable to that of surface temperature is the anthropogenic component, which is mainly driven by greenhouse gases. So we did some sensitivity analysis using models. So what happens if we keep the carbon dioxide the same as it is now and we don't allow it to increase? And that's called RCP 2.6. In between is 4.5 and 6. And the last one is 8.5, which is keeping the carbon dioxide to increase as on the present time, the same rate as at present. And it will lead to 936 parts per million at the end of the century. And the net result are shown on the right. With temperature, the temperature will go up by as much as 45 degrees. Otherwise, if we do something about CO2 and keep it from increasing, then at a certain point in the near future, it will flatten out and there's no increase in temperature and the world will be more livable. There's also a problem in the Arctic, in the fact that we've observed a large decline in the Arctic ice during the summer. And that suggests that we will lose the ice altogether during the summer. And if we abide by RCP 2.6, we could still save that because in the mid-century, the decline will flatten out and it doesn't decline anymore. Otherwise, sometime in the middle of the century, we'll lose the ice cover. And there's this issue about ocean acidification, which I'll also discuss later. If we abide by RCP 2.6, then the PS is not gonna increase anymore, much more than where we are now. Otherwise, we'll start to drop by more and more until we have an ocean that is in trouble. So basically, the changes are shown on the right with RCP 2.6. We don't have much change in temperature, not much change in precipitation, not much change in the ice cover, and not much change in acidity. Otherwise, there are tremendous changes in temperature, precipitation, and ice, as well as acidity in the ocean. So the impact, and actually we are observing it now, is the fact that we have a warming planet, And the warming is actually not even spatially. In fact, it's concentrated in the polar regions. And as you see now, it's the rate of warming is highest in the Arctic region. And in fact, we read a paper recently that indicates that the warming is 3 times higher in the Arctic than the global warming. So the biggest manifestation or indicator of that warming is actually seen in the Arctic basin. The Arctic basin is covered by sea ice, and it used to be that much of the Arctic basin is covered by ice at the end of the summer, as shown over here. But in recent years, you can see that it's practically much less ice than before, and that has been sustained in the last few years. So that's represented in this graph, a large decline, something like 10 to 14% per decade. So as indicated earlier, if this continues on, we'll lose the ice cover in the Arctic by the end of, by the middle of the century. And this whole area will become blue water for the first time. And it has been observed that ice in the Arctic has always been there, as observed in the last 1500 years. So a problem with the decline of ice in the Arctic is the fact that the Arctic then becomes a lot warmer, because the ocean absorbs a lot of energy from the sun and becomes warmer, and ice is a lot colder than the ocean. And the problem is that the surrounding areas are also cryospheric areas, like that's also the site of a lot of glaciers, snow cover, permafrost, and most importantly, the Greenland ice sheet. So this is the Greenland ice sheet, and the reason why we are concerned about it is because the sea level equivalence of the Greenland ice sheet is about 7 meters. So if you just increase the sea level by 6 meters, you affect about 300 million people worldwide. And there's recently been a publication indicating that the ice sheet is in peril, published in Nature. But our own analysis indicates that there's even another problem that might accelerate the demise of the ice sheet. The fact that although the elevation of the ice sheet is very high, about 3 or more kilometers from sea level, and it's very cold throughout the year, the area that gets melted on the surface is very little at the beginning. What you see is the orange that gets melted. This is already 2000, so early on, the orange would be a lot smaller in area. So this is, the white is the only area where it doesn't get melted. But it has been the case that for some years after that, like in 2002, almost the whole area got melted on the surface. And in 2012, it was even worse. So there's a declining area in Greenland that doesn't get melted in the summer. And the reason why we worry about that is when the surface gets melted, it produces liquid water that you see here that then percolates to the bottom. And the water then gets into the bottom of the ice sheet, and it can serve as a lubricant that makes the ice sheet dynamic. So if the ice sheet moves a lot, then it becomes unstable, and you may get a lot more chunks from the ice sheet being deposited to the Atlantic Ocean. The same is true with the Antarctic. Actually, Antarctica has a sea level equivalence of 65 meters. But it's divided into East Antarctica, which is extremely cold, and West Antarctica. Now, East Antarctica is basically safe because it's really the coldest area on Earth. It can go as cold as minus 80 degrees centigrade during the winter. But West Antarctica is vulnerable because in the summer, the temperature is only about 5 degrees centigrade. So a slight increase in temperature will get the area melted. On top of that, the ice sheet in West Antarctica is sitting on the bedrock that is below sea level. So that makes it even more vulnerable. So we worry about sea level rise, and we have satellite instruments that now monitor the sea level continuously. And over the period of since 1993, we have looked at the data, and the results are represented here in terms of sea level rise. And you can see that especially there's a lot of variability. For example, in San Francisco, there's actually not much in terms of sea level rise. And you can see that the red, which is the global average, is very similar to that in San Francisco. That's the case of Carlos Tetan. In Stockholm is even the opposite. But in Manila, if you look at this, that's the average, and the slope for Manila is much higher. So in fact, for Manila, the rate of sea level rise is about 3 times global average. So there's been some questions asked, why the spatial distribution of sea level rise is so varied. And some people that were thinking about internal variability as caused by El Nino or other oscillatory phenomenon. But a study was made recently at JPL trying to look at the data and do modeling studies, trying to remove the effect of natural phenomena variability. And this is with the original data, which is very similar to what I showed earlier. And this one is with the variability removed. And you can see that if at all, the rate of sea level rise near the Philippines is even higher. So that's a cause for concern. So I live in Maryland, and just about 2 hours away, there's this Chesapeake Bay where there's an island. There used to be 4 houses in that island. And as of 2016, there's only 1 house left, and it looks like this. So that is what can happen in islands all over the world. And recently, I just went to the 100 islands. So most of those islands would be underneath the surface with sea level rise. And in fact, the Philippines is actually vulnerable because it's number 10 in the world with the largest population near the coastal regions. And 20% of this population is in the coastal zone as well. So one problem is flooding. as a result of warming, we have been getting more and more extreme floods. And some of you may remember Ondol. And this flood is an indication that there are increases in flooding frequency, especially for extreme flooding. Another is drought. As you see here, there are times when the area of drought is actually extreme. And one example was in California, where they had drought for several years, 2011 to 2016. That actually killed about 102 million trees. And there was a lot of problems with agricultural products, since California is one of the food baskets of the world. And locally in Cotabato, we had a drought in 2015. So this is an example of the drought over rice crops and corn crops. And actually, a lot of people suffered. Around 25,000 had to be rationed because of the drought in Cotabato. So fire is another problem. If you have drought, then it can be followed by extensive fire. This is what happened in California from satellite. This is as observed from the ground in Indonesia. And the Indonesian fire was actually large scale. It destroyed 850,000 hectares of forest and $2 billion in property in 2019. And to think that the previous year, in 2018, about more than 500,000 hectares of forest was also destroyed. So this is very damaging to the environment, and the trend is shown in this plot here. So another effect of warming is actually the occurrences of heat waves. And we had the big heat waves in Russia in 2010. Drought happened all over Russia. There was ranging fire all over. In fact, they recorded 558 fires covering 180,000 hectares. And the temperature soared up to 42 degrees centigrade, causing 56,000 to die. There were similar events in Europe that killed 35,000 people, and one in Chicago that killed 900 people. So one of the big things that is not associated with climate change, but is a direct effect of increasing carbon dioxide, is ocean acidification. So this is the increase in atmospheric CO2. The biggest sequestration is occurring in the ocean. So the PCO2 in the ocean has been increasing as well. And in the process, the pH of the ocean has been declining, making it more and more acidic. And this is a problem because the ocean can only sequester so much carbon dioxide. The other that's not absorbed directly reacts with carbonate into other molecules. And carbonate is very important in terms of the shell formation and skeletons. So it affects clams, crabs, oysters, orcas, and other planktons. So it can lead to a dead spots in the ocean, and it can severely impact the fisheries industry. So the distribution of warming, as it is now, of ocean acidification, as it is now shown over here, and it's actually concentrated near the polar region, where fisheries is actually very productive. So it can greatly impact fisheries. But there's some good news, the fact that people tend to get more and more into alternative energy, like solar power. It used to cost a lot per watt, more than 900, and it has been reduced to almost zero. At the same time, since 2005, there's an exponential increase in the use of solar panels. So globally, we're getting a lot more power from solar cells than ever before. And even wind technology has gone into much more abundant use as well. This is the wind turbine in Bengi, Ilocos Norte. We are the first to establish such a facility in Southeast Asia, but now it's being adopted throughout Southeast Asia. And globally, that wind power has increased from 6.1 gigabyte, which we thought was almost practically negligible, but now it has increased to 490 gigawatt in 2016. So now it must be even a lot more. So to summarize, CO2 has been increasing more rapidly than anticipated. Key sources have been identified, making mitigation more focused and perhaps more easy to implement. So we know that excessive CO2 can cause a lot of problems, causing extreme events and ocean acidification. And mitigation strategies are needed, but it's probably a lot easier because we can identify where they are. And we need good environmental policies to alleviate problems with flooding, drought, fire, and other environmental problems. So John asked me if there's anything about COVID that could help the environment. What I've seen is that the global CO2 was reduced by 5.5% in the first half of 2020 compared to the same period in 2019. Pollution in China was reduced by 25%. Aerosol optical depth in India, where you never see the sky sometimes, is reduced from 0.68 in early March to 0.15 in April. So there are lots of advantages in reducing CO2, and I don't favor continuation of the lockdown, but at least this indicates that there is an anthropogenic solution to this anthropogenic problem. So, salamat, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Comiso, for that very comprehensive and interesting run-through on the state of knowledge on climate change, particularly highlighting the anthropogenic role on climate change and its impacts on both human and the natural systems. I think in relation to the question on the COVID-19, our next speaker which, would be able to talk more about that. But before I call him, let me just inform our participants that we will entertain the question and answer after the two other presentations. And we have also noted those of you who have raised their hand. So although it does not prevent Dr. Comiso to chat you online using the Q&A windows. So let's move on. Our next presenter is a professor of atmospheric chemistry and air pollution of the Department of Earth Sciences and Environment, the Faculty of Science and Technology of the University of Kebangsaan, Malaysia. He is a fellow of the Malaysian Academy of Science. At the same time, a concurrent deputy dean at the postgraduate level at the Faculty of Science and Technology, also of UKM, from 2018 to the present, and has been a recipient of the Top Research Scientist Malaysian Award of the Academy of Science Malaysia in the year 2018. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce to you our next speaker to discuss on the topic concentration of major air pollutants during lockdown due to COVID-19 pandemic in Southeast Asia in the person of Professor Dr. Mod Talib Latif. Dr. Talib, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much to John for very interesting for the invitation to this conference. And thank you very much for the nice introductions. The title of my presentation today is Concentration of Major Air Pollutants During Lockdown Due to the COVID-19 Pandemic in Southeast Asia. My name is Muhammad Talib Latif. Call me Talib actually. I'm from University Kebangsaan Malaysia. With me, there are several other researchers from different institutes. I'm from University Kebangsaan Malaysia. There are researchers from University Technology Malaysia, University of Wollongong, Australia, and National Observatory Athens in Greece. So I think, as you know, that Southeast Asia was not an exception to the hit of novel coronavirus. We have pandemic COVID-19 in Southeast Asia, and even though the pandemic is not as dangerous or not as bad as in Europe and United States, but we are very concerned in terms of the pandemic because it affects the human health. For the COVID-19 cases in Southeast Asia so far, for the world cases, we have more than 15 million.
Your slides is not showing up.
I tried to. You see my slide?
Yeah, it's now showing up. Thank you.
Okay, I'm so sorry. Okay, the world population, we have more than 15 million. So far, you can see that in Philippines, there are 76,000 cases, for example. The number of that is more than 1,800. And the number of cases per million is about 729. In Malaysia, we have 8,000 cases. The number of cases per million is 284. So far, we have 123 deaths. In Philippines, we have 1,879 deaths. In Indonesia, also, we have 95,000 cases with more than 4,600 deaths. And this is from 25 July 2020. So far, when we have a pandemic, we have a lockdown in Southeast Asia. This one also I get from the internet. I found that several countries actually started their lockdown from the 2nd or 3rd week of March. We can see that, for example, in Indonesia, they start in 15 March. In Malaysia, 18 March. Philippines start 16 March. And other countries a bit late. For example, Myanmar in 18 April. And there are 2 countries actually not even start or not even did the lockdown. For example, Brunei and also Laos. Some countries actually conducted a full lockdown, the other is a partial lockdown. So as we know that the lockdown actually give a good impact on air pollution, even though pandemic actually cause a very dangerous effect to human being. As a result of lockdown and the disruption in human and industrial activities, numerous countries around the world has significant reduction on air pollution, especially on the concentration of nitrogen dioxide. You can see over here in India, can see a blue sky. Even in Indonesia, we have a very good blue sky during the lockdown. So objective of our study is to investigate the effect of lockdown measures on air quality in the Southeast Asia region using satellite remote sensing, and to determine the changes of air pollutant from ground-based measurement with special focus on Malaysia. So to have our air quality data for satellite image, we measure aerosol optical depth by using Himawari 8, which is a Japanese weather satellite operated by the Japan Meteorological Agency. It was launched on 7 October 2014, and it carries the advanced Himawari imager sensor, which operate at 16 band from visible to infrared. For AOD measurement, the level 3 product Himawari 8 and improved version of L2 AOD product that minimize cloud contamination, as shown by Kikuchi 2018. Aerosol product also from Himawari 8 have been compared and evaluated against Aeronet at several stations in Southeast Asia. And this also has been agreed with a study by Young 2020. For satellite NO2 measurement, the tropospheric NO2 column density is systematically measured by the Dunn-Finch OMI, ozone monitoring instrument sensor, on board Aura satellite, which follow a sun synchronized orbit with an equator crossing time near 1345 local time. And O2 concentration were obtained from the NASA website. This is the website that we download our data. Other than satellite data, we also get a ground level measurement. For this, we actually conduct our research in Malaysia, because in Malaysia we have 65 stations with hourly data. The data actually belong to Malaysian Department of Environment. The concentration of air pollutants such as PM10, PM2.5, NO2, SO2, CO, and ozone. And also this station actually measure meteorological factors such as wind speed, wind direction, relative humidity, and UV radiations. This is a station in all over Malaysia that collected data for air pollutants. This is our result of AOD was satellite image. This is A is 2018. We compare our data 2019 with this C, where we get the data for AOD during the lockdown, 18 March to 30 April. We can see over here, over the Southeast Asia, it's very hard to determine the comparison in the northern part of Southeast Asia because of biomass burning. But in the southern part of Southeast Asia, we can see a clear from biomass burning, where we can compare, see the level of AOD in C to A and also B. We can see over here overall the concentration or the value of AOD is a bit lower during the lockdown compared to the same time in 2018 and 2019. This is the data that we get based on the time, a specific time, and we compare the same time in 2019 and 2020. We can see over here in Manila, the concentration, the value of AOD is 0.25, a bit low compared to 2019, but a bit high compared to 2018. We can see from the image there was indicator of biomass burning a little bit that influenced the value of AOD. But for the area in the southern part of Southeast Asia, we can see clearly the reduction of AOD value, for example, in Kuala Lumpur, 0.17, Brunei, and also Singapore. But it's very hard for us to differentiate the AOD value in area like Bangkok and Vientiane, Laos, because of biomass burning. You can see the red and red color, or yellow and red color in the image. This is AOD measurement satellite. Actually, it's very hard to differentiate the image between the result in 2020 compared to 2019 and 2018. But we can see it's quite a blue color over here in Kuala Lumpur, around Singapore. But in Philippines, we can see a little bit yellowish color showing a bit high AOD compared to the 2019 and 2018. So the AOD measurement, we are satellite in Malaysia because we have data in Malaysia. We found that in the industrial areas, urban and suburban and rural areas, we found all of them show a lower AOD value compared to 2018 and 2019. So the lockdown in Malaysia showed that the concentration of particulate matter, as indicated by AOD, is going down. So this is NO2 via satellite image. This is in March, A. B is in April. We can see that the bluish color in April means that this is comparison on the data in 2020 compared to the average of 2015 to 2019. The yellow color means the reduction because of negative reductions. You can see there are many blue color within the city center in Southeast Asia. So for the quantitative value, you can see that over here there were reductions of NO2 concentration based on the column NO2 column concentrations. You can see over here the level of NO2, for example, the reductions, the percentage of reductions in Kuala Lumpur is about -33%, and April in -27%. And we can see over here in Manila, for example, in -31 and -34. And we can see that the reduction is all over the Southeast Asia, except for the northern part of Southeast Asia. For example, here is Vientiane and also Ho Chi Minh City, where we had a biomass burning episode at that particular time. So I also compare our data with the Sentinel-5P satellite data study by Suarez and Milivirta 2020. We can see here, this one is in 2019, and this one is 2020. We can see over here the level of NO2 reduced significantly during lockdown in Manila compared to at the same time in 2019. So it's also indicate that NO2 reduction happened in Manila during the lockdown. So this is a ground level measurement in Malaysia based on the stations recorded by Department of Environment. You can see that over here, the PM, can see reduction of PM, especially in industrial and urban areas. Rural areas is very hard to have reductions. NO2 can see reductions. CO happen in urban and suburban area. We don't have data on industrial areas. SO2 not indicate a good reductions because the level of SO2 is very low actually, and the comparison is very hard to do. But the ozone, we found that the indication that the concentration is a little bit increased during the lockdown. This is a ground level measurement for industrial and urban for PM10, PM2.5, and NO2. We can see that the blue color actually reduced during the lockdown. The blue color show the result in 2020 over here, and you can see the most reduced pollutant is NO2. You can see over here after the lockdown, the concentration is far below the standard, as well as the result from 2018 and 2019. We also focus our work in the Klang Valley during the movement control order. We can see that in Klang Valley, we have 6 stations in Kuala Lumpur and surrounding area. We call it Kuala Lumpur Mega Urban Area. This year, in 2020 compared to 2019 and 2018, you can see that PM10, NO2 show very low during the lockdown, but not for O3 over here. O3 indicate a little bit increasing trend, as well as other stations. This is Putrajaya, our new capital, a new administrative area, show the ozone concentration a little bit high compared to the other pollutants. Also, in some part, PM also not very good indicator. The best indicator for the lockdown is NO2, mostly because of motor vehicles. This is other station outside the Kuala Lumpur. You can see over here, PM, the ozone actually also show the increasing trend. For other pollutant, especially PM, NO2 actually has a very good, again, a good indicator for the lockdown reductions of air pollutants, NO2, but ozone, again, outside the Kuala Lumpur show the increasing trend as well. So this is comparison at same period in terms of percentage. You can see that PM10 show to be have a good indicator of reductions. PM2.5 also, NO2 is the best indicator. SO2 is mixed. For example, in station in Klang, for example, industrial area, we found that there is increasing trend of SO2 comparison between 2020 2019. In the Kuala Lumpur urban environment, we also found that in certain area, especially in the city center, the concentration of ozone is increased because of the chemistry of NOx and ozone precursors. This one, CO also indicate a good reductions. So this is the station, the busiest station, the busiest area in Kuala Lumpur, Petaling Jaya. You can see that PM10, PM2.5, SO2 also indicate reductions. CO, NO2 also indicate reduction, the blue color. But ozone actually show the increasing trend. We found that ozone actually related to its precursor, ozone precursor. Ozone actually contribute by hydroxyl, peroxyl, HO2, RO2, and also give the oxygen single to NO2 that produce NO, and at last this O react with O2 becoming O3. But in the city center, usually the O3 actually titrate by NO. Because of NO is very low during the lockdown, this actually titration process is not a very good interact between NO and O3. So it give this O3 actually increase in particularly in the urban environment. in the city center. So this is ground level measurement in the Klang Valley. We see that this is for PM10, PM2.5. We can see the indication of reductions a little bit for PM. Ozone also increase a little bit for almost all stations. The one that show a very good reduction are NO2 again, and also CO. Because of, as mentioned, SO2 is very low, it's very hard to differentiate the comparison between the diurnal pattern during the lockdown and before lockdown. So far the conclusions for the study is the AOD value recorded during the lockdown in Southeast Asia in general reduced except in the northern Southeast Asia region because of the biomass burning. NO2 level exhibited large reductions, around 27 to 34% during the COVID-19 period at most cities in Southeast Asia, except for Ho Chi Minh and Yangon due to the biomass burning episode. The reduction of NO2 level was strongly linked with the country's effort to restrict the movement of people within and across countries and control their industrial business activities. Surface O3 concentration in the city center shows increasing trend because of the chemistry of ozone and its precursor. So this is for further reading our group paper during the lockdown. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Talib, for that very interesting presentation. At least we have the positive side of the lockdown. Of course, it many of the other dimensions far outweighs the positive side. But nonetheless, this is an environmental aspects which is quite positive that goes beyond many of the negative implications of COVID-19. So our last presenter for part one of the session is the Associate Professor of Data Assimilation and Atmospheric Chemistry of the Department of Hydrology and Atmospheric Sciences of the University of Arizona in USA. He is a faculty member of the UA Graduate Interdisciplinary Programs on Remote Sensing and Spatial Analysis and Applied Mathematics. His research focus on investigating human fingerprints and atmosphere, and he is a recipient of several NASA Group Achievement Awards. Our speaker is also a co-chair of the Analysis of Emissions Using Observations, acronym AMIGO, activity of the International Global Atmospheric Chemistry. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to call on our next speaker to discuss his topic entitled Towards the Identification of Emergent Properties in Atmospheric Composition Using Satellite Data, a case of megacity emissions monitoring from space. Let me call on Dr. Abilino F. Arellano Jr. Abe, the floor is yours.
Thank you, John. Let's wait for my screen to share. Can you see my screen?
Yes, Abe, thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you, John, for having me in this session. And thank you for Dr. Comiso and Dr. Talib for a nice introduction on CO2 problem, at the same time for air quality problem against the backdrop of anthropogenic activity. What I'm going to share with you today is some of my research on the fundamental direction that our research group is pursuing, and that is how do we utilize satellite remote sensing instruments and products to better understand emissions and the spatial and temporal variability of those emissions in a way that we could improve our capability to assess, monitor, report, and in fact predict the changes in this in our atmosphere due to this emissions. What you're seeing there is just all of the birds are flying out there for NASA, but these are all polar orbiting satellites, and they sample the globe once or twice a day. But we'll have a revisit time for about 10 days or so. So we don't really see a lot of we don't see a lot of this. We don't observe this in terms of very high resolution in terms of temporal aspect. In 2016, the National Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine published a consensus science report and is identifying one of the science priority research area is to better understand emissions and its spatial and temporal variability, as well as its sources and sinks. This is just part of the report, where you see the sources on the other side, and then the societal impacts on the other side. And we really need to understand both of these processes, both the predictive capability and the feedback of these emissions to the causes. The idea is we want to attribute this cause or the impacts to causes of, especially for anthropogenic activity. This is really exemplified by the CO2 problem, and Dr. Comiso already showed you this similar graph of CO2, but this is a simulation from NASA gathered with regards to the abundance of carbon dioxide produced from fossil fuel combustion, as well as fires from biomass burning. And as you can see, you see a weather-like carbon weather pattern here. But against that backdrop, you'll see that it is only about a couple of ppm. And that is way lower compared to the background of 415 ppm nowadays. So it's about 1/4 to 0.5% of CO2. And so it's akin to finding the needle in a haystack and finding really quantifying well what is the contribution of anthropogenic activity has fossil fuel CO2 in this 415 ppm of concentration. So that's a very daunting task. The way to do it, and there's two approaches for this, is the bottom-up approach and the top-down approach. The bottom-up starts with an activity, information of an activity, road transportation, power plants, and an efficiency, as well as its emission factors. And from that, you build up an emission inventory, and we use a model to input those emission inventory and calculate abundance. The top-down estimate starts with what we observe in the ambient surroundings, what we observe CO2 concentrations, air pollutant concentrations, and from that infer emissions out using the model as well. And so, as you can see, there are disadvantages to this. One is it's hard to verify. The other one is that it's incomplete. We don't really have a lot of observations, although we have satellite data. But it's very hard to attribute because there's transformation that goes on, and there's weather phenomenon that actually impacts that as well. It's a very strongly coupled system. What we can do is actually think about it as a systems approach, wherein we think about it as this one part, the air, as one part of the system, the Earth system, as interconnected with the other parts of the system. And we want to look at it from a bigger perspective, from a larger perspective, from a bird's eye view perspective. And it's similar to an environmental Kuznets curve, wherein you see, for example, as a city evolves and develops, it requires more energy demand and material supplies and so on, and that pollution actually increases at that time. But there's a point in which there's a turning point whereas the city develops more, then you have finances, you have capability, technology capabilities to improve or control, regulate emissions. And so there are many satellites out there. This is just one of the papers showing several of these satellites. This is for air quality, OCO2, which Dr. Camisa showed. It's not here, but this is for air quality. So there's TROP-OMI, there's OMI that Dr. Talib showed. There's MOPET for CO and so on. But they have different sampling characteristics in terms of space and time. And we think about this as the five blind man. We want to really look at it from not just one part of the elephant, but in the entire thing, the entire elephant, so we can infer rigorously what's the anthropogenic impact. And so the question that I really want to ask is what can satellite data tell us about emergent properties of atmospheric composition? This is motivated by the fact that even US EPA inventory emissions are still out of sync. When I say out of sync, we still there's a discrepancy between what you see in the from space and what you actually report as a bottom-up estimate. And this is just one paper that we published several years ago when we look at there's actually a slowdown in terms of NOx, nitrogen dioxide emissions in the recent decade because of changes in our activity, essentially. So the idea is to look at different constituents, and the idea is to look at different parts of the system. And what if you look at the emissions and look at the abundance, and they are coupled in one specific equation. It's combustion. Combust a fossil fuel, you use oxygen and nitrogen, and you produce pollutants. Carbon dioxide is not a pollutant per se, but CO, NOx, SO2, carbon, these are all monitored as a criteria pollutant. So what if we actually look at the difference between this abundance to tell us about the efficiency of a certain city, to tell us about how it evolves across time? And so this is just an example of what we did in the past. And in the x-axis, you see the standard deviation of nitrogen dioxide columns, or XNO2. And the circles corresponds to GOSAT. This is the Japanese Space Agency's CO2 retrieval that is with the CO2 retrieval algorithm implied to this. And you can see that even when we look at the NO2, and as Dr. Talib showed, this is a very indicative of activity. And also it is indicative of efficiency. It's very correlated with CO2. And you see that China is in this realm, and then the other one, the developing countries, is in the other side. But what if we actually use CO as well? This is from MOPET CO, and the other one is from OMI and O2. You'll see actually you can differentiate, you can disentangle. The hope is that we can disentangle natural versus anthropogenic emissions. In this case, we're just looking at the sectoral contribution. Let's say Amazon is more on the fire emissions. China is in both producing high CO and producing high NOx. And so we can also look at it from a decadal point of view, and the changes that these regions can actually evolve. So you see that you have Los Angeles, Beijing, Tehran, and Dhaka, and we don't really have a lot of CO2 data, so we use GDP as a proxy. And again, you'll see that each of these regions, each of these cities have a different trajectory depending on practices, depending on technology, and of course, GDP. And so question is, can we look at this same graph with Metro Manila and other urban agglomerations in the country? We've started also looking at it from a CO2 point of view over megacities, and we've ranked, in fact, several of these megacities from the top to the bottom, and CO2 here corresponds to a measure of efficiency of combustion. You see Beijing is in the lower end, while Germany, London is in the higher end. It was very surprising to us, that was in 2013, it was very surprising to us when we look at the data, ground-based measurements and field experiments, that our values or the ratios actually correspond very well with ground-based and field campaign measurements. So it's very promising to see. We've looked at also several of these in terms of the plot that I showed you before. Manila is over here in a lower quadrant. but Beijing and Tianjin is in the higher quadrant. And you see there's a complement between the fossil fuel energy proportion with regards to renewable energy that's been used. Very interesting features that you can actually disentangle combustion efficiency between different cities. We've looked at it for China, for different pollutants. And what we found is that there is actually an evolution of the cities from a low developed city like Shenyang to a higher, well-developed city like Shenzhen. And there's, in fact, a change in the sectors, and the sectors that really was driving this change is the industry and residential sectors for Shenzhen, which is actually more efficient relative to Shenyang. We've also looked at it from the point of view of Africa. Africa is a very interesting contrast with China. China has a very high polluted condition environment. Then Africa is, as you can see in the night lights, it's all dark. Human Development Index of Africa is very low, lots of war, but there's actually an emerging rise of anthropogenic activity in these parts of the world that cannot be seen, at least from now, from space. What we can show here, for example, is the sector, our contributions of different sectors, power plants, industry, and residential and roads, and most of it are in the road and transportation sector. But there's an increasing trend in the CO and NOx in terms of the change in the decade, across the decade, except the South Africa, which you can actually see in the night light as a big power plant emitter, big NOx emitter. We've tried to look at it from change in decadal change in these emissions, or also in terms of abundance. The red corresponds to abundance based from satellite space-based analysis. The gray is corresponding to emissions. And you can see that the change in the present change relative to 2005 is different between what we see from space and what we see from the bottom up. And the bottom up approach is actually very correlated with socioeconomic factors, GDP, fossil fuel use, population, electrical consumption, while the abundance-based estimates were very much confounded by natural events, natural processes, fire, lightning, and clouds. So the question really was, can we really see it from space? Yes, maybe for China, but at least from Africa, we don't really see that yet. We don't know if it's a retrieval issue, or we don't know if it's an information issue with regards to bottom up. We can look at it from the perspective of drop, or the rate at which efficiency improves, and this is based on the power law. So if you look at the exponent here, that corresponds to the rate at which it's dropping. Sub-Saharan Africa is dropping less compared to China in terms of, again, efficiency-wise, improving efficiency, but it's still way far from China. And the emission-based and the abundance-based approach are still very different. And so the question that I want to pose is, again, for Metro Manila, but also for this. This is a new paper by the Global Carbon Project, and showing, again, the effect of COVID-19 and very detailed analysis of global daily changes due to COVID in different sectors, power plant and residential and industry, and of course, surface transport or surface transportation. So you can see that there's actually a nice decrease. Our question is, can we actually verify this at this scale, at this daily scales? This is from a bottom-up approach. We don't have that capability yet for the top-down approach at this scale. And so I would like to end by saying that, yes, this is a very interesting opportunity. We would very much interested to look at it for Metro Manila. And I would like to shout out the local experts in the Philippines, University of the Philippines, LaSalle, Ateneo, Manila Observatory. There's TCON site, there's Aeronet sites that's already available for us to look at, and international community is actually looking at. There's also collaborative research of these universities with international agencies like the Germans and the Americans and the Catholics and MAIS 2005. I'd like to look at this from an international activity that I'm co-chairing, which is looking at essentially these emissions in abundance, and can we actually provide a robust way to understand this in terms of predictability. And so I thank you all, and maraming salamat, and back to you, John.
Thank you very much indeed, Abe, for that very interesting and comprehensive discussion on the value of satellite data, as well as the challenges associated with it in understanding mega city emissions and monitoring from space, but at the same time, in terms of calling on for potential collaboration in the Philippines and in different parts of the world to really address this particular scientific challenge. So without much ado, in the interest of time, let me call on my co-host to facilitate the Q&A session. Dr. Dixon, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. John Pulhin. And also thank you very much for our presenters, interesting papers. So I think we're going to flash we have selected a few questions in the interest of time. And I'm very glad to notice that this webinar is well attended, 118 participants. Okay, let's start with the first question. Okay, this question goes to Dr. Comiso. All right, this is from Dr. Mendoza of UP Los Baños. Dr. Comiso, how do you separate or distinguish and therefore measure the anthropogenic component of CO2 emission from the non-anthropogenic measured or collected in the atmosphere? Or measurements for both are done from the source, example, carbon budget. RCP 2.6 and other RCPs are only based on CO2. How about other GHGs? RCP 2.6, which is based on 421 ppm CO2. Can we go back to that first question? All right. Are we there now? The other RCPs beyond 2.6 seems to result to significant temperature increase up to 6 degrees. All right, and then there's another related question from Dr. Diaz. Are we near? He's asking about the safe levels.
Okay, so
can we go back to the first slide? Yeah.
Can I answer
right,
that?
yeah.
There,
Dr. Camisa. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Please go ahead.
there is a natural variability of CO2, and it goes normally from 190 to 290 parts per million. So since the Industrial Revolution, we have been exceeding that regular interval. So from 290 to 300, it increases by about 2.5 parts per million. So whatever is the increase can be attributed to anthropogenic component. Now, separating the two is, I think, very difficult. But what we are looking is just that an effect, the net effect of increasing greenhouse gases. So when you look at the RGP 2.6, for example, what is included is already a combination of the other greenhouse gases converted into CO2 equivalent. Now the question is, are we there now? Do we have 421 ppm? It changes from one year to another. So when we wrote this review or this report, that was about what we thought was the current value is probably higher now. But if you look at the Kyoto Protocol, what they've been asking is to go back in time and get the CO2 level to even the level of the 1990s. But that was not possible to fulfill, and this is some sort of a compromise, I think. And the modeling shows that even if we come up with ability to maintain 421 parts per million, then there are very positive returns, such that we get that increase in surface temperature to level up, and we avoid getting the Arctic ice cover to become a blue ocean in the summer, and we avoid ocean acidification. So that is already a big benefit. I think the less amount of CO2, the better, because then maybe we can reduce the warming a little bit. With the 2.6, what it tries to do is to get the level of temperature to approximately the same as what we have now. Did I miss anything?
Yeah, yes. Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Comiso. Uh, let's look now at the next question. All right. Yeah, here is for Dr. Maud Latif from Dr. Diaz. What is the estimated cost saved in the initial reduction of air pollution level due to COVID-19 lockdown in your country? You have mentioned. And the other question is, in your analysis of air quality in Southeast Asia, from Mr. or Miss Okiyama, I would like to ask whether you have seen a relationship between the number of mortality of COVID patients and the air quality. Is there a distinct or interesting results that connects the two? Professor Dr. Latif?
Okay, thank you very much. I think there are many research questions that we need to answer from the COVID-19 pandemic and its relation to the air pollutions. I think maybe the first one, many researchers actually study on the impact of air pollution itself to the number of cases of COVID-19. In terms of the first questions, I actually don't have any data on the estimated cost, but I think this is a very good questions and very good research question for us to do, for example, especially in the Southeast Asia, where we don't have any data on cost related to the reduction of air pollution. For the time being, I think we can do this kind of research because we have data on reduction of air pollution. So we need to have people in researcher involved with health and related to the cost of impact of health from air pollution to estimate the cost of the air pollutant reduction in the Southeast Asia. I think it can be done, but for the time being, we don't have any data on the cost. The second thing, I think the second question is very interesting as well. There are so many efforts for us to determine the impact of air pollutant and to the mortality. In Malaysia, for the time being, we have data on air pollution, hourly air pollution, and we try to determine its impact to the number of cases, as I mentioned. But so far, we don't have a good result to correlate between the impact of air pollution to the health or mortality. I think we need to be careful in terms of the air pollutant. As I mentioned just now in my presentation, there were several pollutants that increased, reduced. For example, NO2, PM10, SO2 a little bit. But there also increasing trend of certain air pollutants such as surface ozone. So we need to take care, or we need to make sure that we use all the data to estimate the impact to human health. That's my answer. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Latif. Okay, let's flash the next question. Yeah, this is the question from Dr. Mendoza to Professor Aureliano. From the top-down approach, on the other hand, my question is similar to my question with Dr. Comiso in terms of distinguishing anthropogenic, non-anthropogenic. If CO2 is measured, collected at the atmosphere, it is not clear to me how you disentangle CO2 into sources. Combustion efficiency is certainly one factor, but are there other factors to consider? Professor Aureliano?
So that's a holy grail kind of question with regards to attribution, because this is really a hard problem because, again, as I said, natural processes dominate, and the anthropogenic activity is only a very small portion of it, although the trend is attributed to anthropogenic activity. So the way that we're doing it from the top down and bottom up is actually reconciling those, and we use the model to actually simulate what we know a priori of this contribution. So we can disentangle it from the modeling's perspective in terms of the contribution of the CO2 sources and sinks, natural and anthropogenic. However, there's also several campaigns and efforts right now to look at what we call tracers of fossil fuel CO2 that is being deployed, and hopefully there will be national networks on this, on the isotopes of fossil fuel CO2 that can actually really is a very good proxy to CO2 from fossil fuel. And so we're looking at that. At the same time, my research group is looking at it from the air quality side. There's a synergy between what you emit, looking at it from a CO2 point of view, and also from the NO2 emissions. Again, efficiency is one thing, but the emission factors is another thing. And so both of this, that's what I would like to emphasize, is that we have to look at it from different perspectives and combine all information that we have, both socioeconomic factors, abundance or measurements in space and in ground and field campaign, and modeling to actually provide a robust assessment. However, we are not there. We're not yet there. Even the Global Carbon Project is still a very hard press to look at what is the contribution of the fossil fuel, not to mention the strong coupling and feedback on the climate. And so I think the short-lived climate species can actually help as well in terms of climate scenarios and so on. But I think we're not yet there. There are some deployments, again, the networks are there. There's even a space-based geostationary proposals out there looking at just carbon staring at one particular region, GeoCarb for US and MicroCarb for Africa. So it's evolving in terms of observation system, it's evolving in terms of modeling, and it's also evolving in terms of the social and economic studies out there.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Aureliana. Okay. We also see a raised hand here from Dr. Gisela Concepcion. Maybe we can recognize Dr. Concepcion if she has a question. Dr. Concepcion? All right, no question. Okay, I think we can entertain at least one last question. All right. Okay, this goes also to, again, to Dr. Comiso from Dave Anastasio. Given that natural variability has been accounted for in the differences in sea level rise, what could be other factors affecting variability in sea level rise, given the assumption that sea levels would be somewhat evenly distributed globally? Yes, Dr. Kumisa, the floor is yours. Dr. Kumisa? I think your microphone is muted.
So can you
Okay,
hear me?
okay. Yes, Dr. Kumisa. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so this is a question that the researchers are still trying to pursue. And the one that I showed you earlier about looking at the effect of natural variability as could be caused by El Nino and similar phenomena showed that what we see as special variability in sea level rise is reproduced, and it was even made worse near the Philippines. So there are many other factors, but they're normally very hard to investigate. There are processes that affects the atmospheric circulation as well as ocean circulation. And it's not known whether there's large variability in those regions where you have an enhancement in sea level rate of sea level rise are going on. So the fact that the phenomenon is repeated with and without removal of natural variability is a reason alone that we have to worry about it. And the fact that in Manila, the sea level rise problem is even more serious. Part of that is likely attributed to the sinking of due to the susceptibility when they extract a lot of water from the bottom. So it's compounded by that, but as you see, the impact of circulation is apparent because it happens for a large area in Western Pacific. So sorry, I can't really give you a down-to-earth answer to that question.
Okay, thank you very much to our panelists. And in the interest of time, we still have a second session. So we have few more questions, but what we're going to do is to take note of all your questions, collate them, and send them to our panel presenters, and you will get a response from them. No? So thank you very much again for your active participation, and I'll give back the floor to Dr. John Paulin.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dixon, for facilitating the first part of the Q&A. Now, moving on to the second part of our presentation. We'll start now with the environmental issues in general. And our first speaker for this session is currently a professor of the College of Forestry and Natural Resources of the University of the Philippines, Los Baños. He is an academician of the National Academy of Science and Technology, Philippines, also a former dean and the chancellor of the University of the Philippines, Los Baños, and he was a principal lead author, and coordinating lead author of the second, third, and fourth IPCC assessment reports, respectively, that is covering the period of 1992 to 2007, about 15 years of involvement with IPCC. Our speaker has also pioneered the applications of geographic information systems in land use planning and watershed management in the Philippines, and currently a member of the National Panel of Technical Experts of the Climate Change Commission of the Philippines, to speak on the topic monitoring of changes in environment to enhance resilience and adaptation. It is my pleasure to call on Dr. Rex Victor O. Cruz. Professor Cruz, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. John. Is my audio okay?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me well?
Yes.
All right. Thank you very much for inviting me in this panel. It's my privilege to be in company with well-accomplished scientists in atmospheric sciences. And for my presentation, I'll be focusing on. Oops, sorry. Let me share screen. Hold on. Okay, so for my presentation, I'll be sharing with you a biopic of one of the programs that we have implemented over the years, and this pertains to a program we call MODISERA, Monitoring of Changes in Environment and Ecosystems to Enhance Resilience and Adaptation. And this program was an initial attempt of establishing a network of observation stations across the country in an effort to be able to relate the changes in environment, the changes in climate, the changes in human activities with the changes in ecosystems and everything else that are found inside ecosystems. So basically, um, this program actually originated from a tiny beginning, and this was actually during the time when coconut scale insect outbreak, happened way back in 2010, if I'm not mistaken, until 2014 or 2015 thereabouts. And this coconut scale insect caused a lot of damages to the industry of coconut, affecting four provinces in southern Tagalog region: Cavite, Laguna, Batangas, and Quezon, causing billions of pesos in damages total over those few years. And this outbreak of coconut scale insects provoked many questions, and that includes what kind of species are there. Initially, it was not very clear what kind of species of coconut scale insects are causing this problem. And then, is climate change related to this? Is change in humidity, temperature, or wind pattern, wind circulation, what's the origin of this? Is this, is this from in country, from the Philippines, or introduced from other countries? And of course, that leads to the question on how do we control that? And that's where we had breakdown in terms of not being fully understanding what triggered it, what was the origin of this, how much do we know about coconut scale insects life cycle and behaviors, etc., etc. And this this led to questions posed to major government agencies, including the Science and Technology, including UPLB, asking the questions that relates to our preparedness for similar pest outbreaks in the future, and how may we prevent similar outbreaks if ever we can. And that leads to this program Modisra, and it was an outcome of a short discussion with then Secretary Montejo on his question on how do we address the problem of coconut scale insects. And I just told him that, we have to understand more clearly what are the life patterns, what are the factors that affect the life and activities of coconut scale insects. That brings us to the topic on, we need to understand more about the ecosystems of, or the ecology of the coconut scale insects, and that entails monitoring ecosystems, and that entails, long-term observations on the different ecosystems. And so, this program came about, and that was intended to build a research and monitoring network across the country to monitor the different ecosystems within a landscape unit. In our case, we chose, watershed units, where we monitor the forest and all other downstream ecosystems that are interlinked to one another. We were focused on understanding what are the impacts or consequences of changes in one ecosystems on the other ecosystems, and how they are actually impacted by climate change conditions and human activities. And this was our concern. Our concern was to understand more clearly the pathways of impacts of direct drivers and indirect drivers on ecosystem and watershed change. We want to understand the quick onset changes that is taking place, and the slow onset changes that are taking place, and that actually led us to design the program to be a long-term monitoring system, because we recognize that there are quick onset changes and there are slow onset changes that happens. I'm just trying to, I have this slide just to relate, Modisera to the current outbreak of coronavirus. And, if it is true that the coronavirus originated from bats, and this is how they, how the guys who studied, this propose it, on how it is transmitted to human beings. And as you can see, from the bats, the virus can be transferred to human beings, and it depends on, how far the human beings are from the bats. It's a question really of, it's a question really of how far or how distant apart are the bats and human beings. And we know that wildlife are driven out of its natural habitats to seek sources of food closer to human settlements due to, for instance, deforestation and forest degradation. And the distance can also be shortened by the fact that human settlements are slowly drawing closer to natural habitats due to unregulated urbanization and land conversion. And with this, the question now leads us to, how far should human beings and bats be from one another, so that we can prevent the transmission of harmful organisms from wildlife to humans, and vice versa. The question then raised is, for instance, related to deforestation. How much of the forest can we disturb? How much of the forest can we harvest? How much of the forest can we convert to other uses? Without really disrupting the steady state of population of different species in the natural systems. And so, this Modisra was intended to monitor those different ecosystems so that we can understand, one of those that we can understand is the thresholds. Okay, the thresholds of impacts of human activities, the thresholds of impacts of climate change on ecosystems and the way they interact with the other ecosystems. There were, originally we proposed 40 sites, and we ended up with 8 sites because of budget limitation. And then originally also we proposed for 10-year program, and then we ended up with 2 years. After which the program, was not able to get fresh fundings for its continuing operations. And the vision was to expand the sites to 18 sites across the country, trying to cover as much of the different typology of climate, geography, and geology, and other considerations. It has 5 projects. The first project is on on-site environmental monitoring. This is where we monitor, most of the important factors that we identified on site, and this includes monitoring of water, of soil, of biodiversity, of human activities, on site. And yeah, basically these are the things that we monitored. We monitor the different ecosystems, and we monitor cross-cutting parameters such as on socioeconomic, soil, biodiversity, water and climate. And these are examples of our sites. And what you can see here are the colored dots, squares, and cross and stars. These are the areas where we had monitoring activities, ongoing monitoring activities during the program lifetime. And there are 8 sites, as I said, and these are how they were set up for monitoring. The second component was on monitoring the responses and productivity of field crops, annual crops, and development of intervention strategies to enhance crop production amidst climate change. And then the third project was basically the same as the second project component, except that this focus now on industrial and fruit crops, the perennial crops, as they are impacted by climate change. And then the fourth component was on the impacts of climate change on integrated pest management. Our interest here was trying to understand how the different insects that are potentially, that can potentially become pests are affected by climate change, and how the changes in their ecosystems are basically caused by human activities, are basically, changing their life cycle patterns. And then the last component was the establishment of controlled environment research facility. And this was meant to be a facility where we can study more closely some key phenomena that we observe on field, and bring them to the lab, study them, so that we can isolate the different significant factors that actually drive this phenomena. So that's the intention of this. This is currently now under construction. And then just an example of our what we found over the at least 1 year of monitoring that we were able to conduct is, for instance, here trying to map out the different species of plants, birds, and bats that are commonly found in 2 sites in 2 ecosystems. In this case, agroforestry ecosystems and forest ecosystems, trying to understand what plant species, bird species, and bat species are common to these 2 ecosystems in these 2 sites. That will give us an idea on, for instance, how well agroforestry is able to mimic the functions of natural forests, and in that sense also understand, how much of agroforestry can we allow without really impinging on the steady state condition of the resident wildlife in the forest habitats. And then, we did this also for single site, trying to understand common species, across 2 ecosystems, for instance. And then we also studied the different feeding guilds of insects so that we can understand which of these are potential pests for crops, which are potential pests for animals. And we had these different outputs. We had a lot of policy briefs coming out of the program. We were supposed to install open data platform before we ran out of funding to make sure that the outputs, the real time outputs of the program are broadcasted to all intended users. And let me end now by citing the major challenges that we experience in trying to establish a network of ecosystem monitoring network in the Philippines. Of course, we had difficulties identifying monitoring sites for the simple reason that we were limited to the number of sites that we can install, but there are so much wide variety of physical and biological and even socioeconomic and political conditions out there, in our country. And then the designing of standard monitoring systems and protocols adaptable to all sites were challenging in the beginning. Of course, we were able to address that. Building on-site monitoring expertise, because we believe that the best monitors will be those that are found in sites, especially those that are located in regional state universities and colleges. Security of monitoring systems and personnel, which is a very, very major concern. And then inadequate funds for sensor-aided remote monitoring devices, which were, which we felt then and which we still believe, are essential monitoring devices that we must have for this type of long-term monitoring programs. Availability of funds to maintain and expand monitoring sites, which is a problem, and then cumbersome procurement process of the government that actually delayed the procurement of important equipment. And even the construction controlled environment research facility was actually hindered by the cumbersome procurement process that we were to undergo. And then the fund sourcing over the long term is of course our major concern, and it is still our major concern. It has been 2 years that the program has been without funding, and our concern is how do we get the long-term funding for this type of program. And I envision that if we can get funding, substantial funding, that we can spend half of it for startup activities and half of it as endowment fund, that can support the maintenance of the observation stations over the long term. But and again, basically these are the experiences that we've had, and hopefully, we can start, we can revive this program and start gathering all this valuable empirical data that we need on the interactions of climate change and human activities on the natural systems. So I guess I'll end up there. And again, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to be part of these panel discussions.
So thank you very much, Dr. Cruz, for that very interesting presentation, particularly highlighting the value of long-term monitoring of environmental changes, while at the same time the associated challenges of really institutionalizing such a system. So moving on, we are also privileged to have our next speaker, who is currently the Executive Director of the Oscar M. Lopez Center, Philippines, while simultaneously serving as the country coordinator and a senior natural resource management scientist of ICRAF, or the World Agroforestry Center. He is also an affiliate professor of the University of the Philippines, Los Baños, At the same time, an academician of the National Academy of Science and Technology, Philippines. He has spent 2 decades of his professional engagement serving as lead author or coordinating lead author in various IPCC report, starting on the third and then fourth, fifth, and even currently as a coordinating lead author on the ongoing sixth assessment report. Our speaker is also a member of the National Panel of Technical Experts of the Philippine Climate Change Commission to discuss with us the topic on climate change research and communication in the Philippines. It is my pleasure to call on Dr. Rodel D. Lasco. Rodel, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John, for that generous introduction. And if I can share my screen now and talk about the topic that was assigned to me, and that is the topic on research, communication. And I'd like to tell you the story of what we did at the Oscar M. Lopez Center. It's an NGO, civil society organization, and funded by the Lopez Group of Companies. And I'd like to tell you the stories that we have been working on for the past 8 years. The whole center started because of the vision of one person. This person is, of course, Oscar M. Lopez, and he is the chair emeritus of the center, still quite active in his late 80s. And he started the center because of his concern that climate and climate change is harming the Filipino people, and he wanted to help. And he thought the best way to do it is to establish a science-based center that will work on climate adaptation here in the Philippines. And the key guiding principle of the center is that all climate action should be guided by the latest science. So it's a unique NGO, it's a unique organization in our country. It's privately funded, an NGO, but very much into science. It is almost like a science center in any of our universities here in the Philippines. And so, yeah, again, just to tell you some of the stories that we have been sort of cooking in the center, here's one. Well, what we tried to do here was to provide advisories. In fact, we do provide regular advisories to the members of the group of companies. But at the same time, we try to analyze and just to see what are the impacts of the first typhoon in the Philippines. That's Typhoon Ambo is the local name. And if we overlay that to the current incidence of pandemic, COVID-19 in the Philippines. So again, here, the sort of the assumption or the hypothesis is that these global challenges, whether pandemics, climate change, biodiversity conservation, all of these planetary scale challenges need to be analyzed in an interconnected fashion. We need to look at it from a systems perspective. And so we plotted the course of the typhoon. And so this was before the typhoon hit, so that we will have advanced information on which local communities will be hit and what is the state of the spread of the pandemic in that particular community. So here we see that we can overlay the analysis of a climate hazard like a tropical cyclone or a typhoon and overlay that with incidents of pandemics. And again, this is with the idea that we should do more and more of this analysis, combining the analysis of different global challenges so that we can respond in a more holistic and systematic way. And so looking at this study, again, climate hazards will continue to complicate COVID-19 response and recovery. By the way, we did a series of those overlays. So before the typhoon, after the typhoon, and even longer term, what are the lessons we can learn? And here are some of the lessons. So the continued complication of COVID-19 response, given climate hazards like typhoons, and again, the behavioral changes needed to respond to climate change in the long run. And but the challenge is how to sustain those changes, even if we change our lifestyle right now. And some of those changes could be beneficial to climate adaptation, for example, and climate mitigation. But how do we sustain them in the long run? And then third, as the lockdown restrictions are eased, and in fact, it's happening right now, it is also an opportunity for us to transition to a more sustainable and resilient society. And again, as mentioned, addressing multiple simultaneous threats, the need for holistic, more systematic approaches so that we can build long-term resilience. And then also the center is working with our climate institutions in this country and producing several products. So on the left side, you see there our Philippines version of the IPCC report. And of course, Professor Pulhin, Professor Cruz, both of them are very much involved in leading this work. And then also we are producing State of the Philippine Climate with our Met Office. The Philippine assessment reports are produced with the Climate Change Commission. And again, we also produce an almanac. So there are many products, several knowledge products, and all of these are available freely from our website. Anyone can download this. We don't sell our products. Now, the other thing that we recently did, Dr. Rex Cruz also part of this work, and that is helping our ministry or Department of Environment and Natural Resources and helping them in looking at the top 10 priority programs of the ministry or the department, and then looking at how they need to adjust these programs, what are the indicators, what is the responsiveness of these programs to climate change, 1.5 degrees, and of course higher. And this is with some funding from UNDP. And we were able to work with the senior officials of the ministry and able to, with them, to come up with potential indicators and potential impacts of climate change to the top 10 priority programs of our Ministry of the Environment and Natural Resources. And then, so the other thing we're doing, now this time more on the comm side, we believe that we have the science and part of our challenge is how do we communicate science to various stakeholders? And of course, one of those is the private sector and being funded by the private sector. So we've been really fortunate to be able with the top leaders of businesses here in the Philippines. And we invited several speakers. Actually, every year we invite people from outside the Philippines. For example, we invited Steve Wilson and others. We call this the Legacy Lectures, and as well as the Climate Dialogues, inviting CEOs and senior leaders of business and trying to inform them of how the climate is changing and how this could affect their businesses and therefore how they can respond to climate change. And then we are also working with the Climate Change Commission, this time in the budget tagging. You know that our country, like other countries of the world, are trying to budget tag or identify which components of the national budget is being allocated for climate change. So there's been this, it's been going on for a few years, but we realize what's really the basis of this budget tagging. What's the basis of prioritization? Is there a sound basis for, say, allocating X amount of money for this particular intervention? And so we feel there's a need to make it more science grounded. And therefore, we're trying to work with our, like a ministry, the Climate Change Commission, and trying to inject more science into the budget tagging. And we're also working on what we call Project Upturn. And Upturn is a project where we try to identify the existing and potential solutions to adaptation, climate adaptation. And we're trying to, again, systematize how we analyze and how we look at all of these potential adaptation solutions to our country. And as well, we're also working with also the Climate Change Commission and even the Earth Observatory of Singapore. And we're trying to do a sea level rise study, SLR study. And this is working with the CCC and hopefully the MPTE, the technical panel where we are also part. So we want to look at sea level rise. In fact, we will have a webinar coming up in a couple of days. I think on Wednesday, we will have this webinar. And because we want to have, for example, an atlas or maps, and of course, derivative products from this sea level rise mapping, so that we can better help our country prepare for the rise of sea level. And again, talk about communication. We even produced a docufilm last year. It's called Kwento ng Klima in Tagalog, or in Filipino. In English, it means stories, climate stories. And we produced this with ABS-CBN. We had a premiere, and it's now available freely in YouTube. It's available freely in the platform, I Want platform. And just a few weeks ago, we were fortunate, or we were really happy that we won this Silver Screen Award by the U.S. International Film and Video Festival for a docufilm on environment and ecology. And again, this is part of our effort. There were many scientists, and the good thing for me, what really attracted me, was that this film combined scientists. There were scientists speaking, but there were lay persons, ordinary people, fisher folks, farmers, and just people from Luzon, Visayas, Mindanao, 3 parts of the country, all speaking about their experience on climate extremes and climate changes that's happening around them. And that's why, I think this is really one of a kind here in this country, melding both science or scientists and ordinary people talking about their climate stories. And right now, we also have launched another effort building on that, on the docufilm last year. And this is the Climate Film Festival for the Youth. Again, with the Climate Change Commission, we're working with them. And we have launched this a few weeks ago. Right now, it's ongoing. And we are challenging youths around the Philippines, especially because of the quarantine, because of the pandemic. They cannot go out. So we're challenging them to produce short films. And so this will go on up to November this year. And I guess that's all for me. I want to say more, but time is so limited. So I'll stop there, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you so much for listening. Back to you, Jan.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lasco. That was a very excellent presentation, highlighting what an NGO can actually do in terms of not only advancing science, but also communicating science. And I think this is a great challenge to reach different sectors of the society, not only the scientists, but even the youth and the rest of the public. So now, moving on, our last but definitely not the least resource person in this particular session is currently the head of the Division of Communication and Scientific Affairs of the Asia Pacific Network for Global Change Research, or APN, based in Kobe, Japan. She manages the APN's Regional Comprehensive Research Programs, or CRRP, and Capacity Development Program, or CAPABL, and oversees up to 50 projects across a range of global change disciplines. She also works closely with academia, governments, and stakeholders engaged in global environmental change and sustainability. She also works across the science policy interface by organizing and conducting stakeholder dialogues at sub-regional levels in the Asia-Pacific region. Our speaker also ensures the timely evaluation of science-based projects, ensuring that their tangible outputs are shared with the governments of the APN's 22 member countries. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to call on our next speaker in the person of Dr. Linda Stevenson, who will be presenting her paper entitled Advancing Science and Human Resource Capacity in Asia through global change research, the case of APN. Linda, the floor is yours.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm just trying to share my screen now. Okay, I think everyone can see my screen.
Yes.
Good morning. Good morning to most of you. Good afternoon to some of you. Probably good evening to some of you as well. I know it's still the weekend in some areas in the globe. I'm Linda Stevenson. Thank you very much, John, for your lovely introduction. And it's a real pleasure, a great honor, actually, for APN to be called upon to join this particular session. It's a real honor to be with the likes of yourself, John, the likes of yourself, Dr. Lasco, and Dr. Cruz. We've known each other for many, many years. Anyway, I will move on with my presentation, which is entitled Advancing Science and Human Resource Capacity in Asia Through Global Change Research and the Case of APN. Bit of a presentation outline. I know we're limited in time, so I won't go through this in detail, but I'll give you a little bit of an insight into who and what APN is, and what global change is, what our vision and goals are, and then work through towards our research and capacity building agendas, how you can apply for funding to the APN through our programs, and then I'll give you a flavour of the kinds of activities that we've conducted in the past 5 years, from 2015 to 2020. And in the spirit of the conference being, outreach to the Philippines, I would like to focus a little bit on one project that focused in a local project that focused in Aurora in the Philippines. I will end by mentioning a little bit about the opportunities that we have for early career scientists, because I know, at least from the participants that I've seen, I know that there's a lot of you out there that are early career scientists as well. Also, having looked back to the participants, so many of you know APN, and it's a real pleasure to have you join this session. So moving on, who are we? Well, Asia Pacific Network was born in 1996. We are an intergovernmental network, and we have currently 22 member countries that crosses 4 subregions of South Asia, of Southeast Asia, which is our yellow part just here where the Philippines is, temperate East Asia, and the Pacific. While we have 22 member countries, a few other countries are approved countries. And what does that mean? It means that they are eligible to apply to the APN for funding. Talking of funding, before I move on, I should absolutely mention that our funding, we are sourced from the government of Japan, mainly, through the national government and through the prefectural government of Kyoto. And we are also funded by the governments of New Zealand and the Republic of Korea. So looking at our vision, well, as I said, we were established in 1996, and what we want to do is successfully address the challenges of global change and sustainability. And in order to do this, we have 4 main goals. These are to support regional cooperation in global change and sustainability research, enhance capacity to participate in this research, strengthen interactions among scientists and policymakers, which is very important these days, strengthening the science policy interface. And of course, provide scientific input to policy decision making and scientific knowledge to the public and to society as well. Also, as a network, one of our main goals is to cooperate with other global change and sustainability networks and organizations, as well as connect with all of the current global agendas, such as the Paris Agreement, the SDGs, the Sendai disaster disaster risk reduction framework. Before I move on further, I thought perhaps, over the years, many people have often wondered, what do we mean by global change? And we've asked many people to provide us with a definition, and every definition was different. So we thought, maybe it's time that we produced our own definition of what global change is. So APN defines global change as a set of natural and human-induced processes in the Earth's physical, biological, and social systems that navigated a significant at a global scale. These changes, however, manifest themselves differently at regional and local scales and require place-based solutions. So it's in this context of the regional and local scales and the manifestation of global change at these levels that brings APN into the picture. So in order to conduct our work as effectively as possible, we do have a set of guiding principles, and some of these are outlined on the slide. We encourage participatory processes that involve both scientists and policymakers to identify emerging issues and support decision making. This actually happens at the top level in the APN through our national focal points who gather in their sub-regions, and we provide topics of high relevance to the APN, and then we move forward and we try and fund relevant research projects that are relevant to our member governments. We ensure high scientific quality that has both policy and regional relevance. And we ensure the policy relevance by really, particularly in this strategic phase, emphasizing interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary, and holistic approaches in our research activities. APN, again, as a network, we provide opportunities for sharing knowledge, best practices, capacity building. One major component of APN's work is capacity building. I'll explain a little bit about that later. So capacity building and education in areas of global change and sustainability. We encourage stakeholder engagement throughout our projects. We love to have our stakeholders engaged from the very beginning. We think that's important. So from the scoping and the design stage, right through to implementation and evaluation as well. And again, as a network, communication is really key to APN, and we really like to we really endeavour to communicate the results broadly to scientific communities, to policymakers, to everyone really, particularly at the regional and global level. So looking at some of our themes, well, in the past, well, the strategic phase from 2015 to 2020, we had our research and capacity development agenda really focused around 5 key thematic priorities, which were climate change and climate variability, biodiversity and ecosystems, changes in atmospheric, terrestrial, and marine domains, resources utilization and pathways for sustainable development. And in this strategic phase in particular, we added a fifth thematic area, which is risk reduction and resilience. But as you can see, these are very, very large topics, and we can't cover everything every year. So again, emphasizing the fact that we do talk to our governments, particularly in their sub-regional groups, and we ask them, what are your priority issues for your region? And they don't change too much from year to year, but they do tend to change. So each year we ask, and we tend to provide a call for proposals. That's annually. I'll speak about that later. And this year, or this year's round of our 2019 call for proposals, we focused on a number of issues, which included the impacts of climate change to the environment. We focused on ecosystem-based adaptation, particularly in relation to disaster risk reduction, climate-smart agriculture, transboundary issues, looking at air pollution, also looking at microplastics. We focused on transition towards a sustainable future. And finally, one of our other key topics was water, food, and energy security. So from this list of priority topics for our 2019 calls for proposals, 26 projects were just recently awarded funds last August, last July in our annual meetings. So let me tell you a little bit about our core programs. It's through our core programs that researchers in the Asia Pacific are able to get funding from the APN for research and capacity building activities. So we have two main core programs. One is focused on collaborative regional research, and the other is focused on capacity development. These are CRRP and Capable, respectively. So we ask our proponents to focus on issues that address knowledge gaps in key scientific areas, of course, that are a priority to our member governments, to look at synthesis and analysis of existing research. We fund research planning and scoping activities, and we look at the development of policy products like integrated assessments, impact assessments, climate models, etc. We work quite closely with WCRP at the moment, and we provide quite a lot of funding for WCRP's projects. On Capable, we focus on scientific capacity development for global change, but really with an emphasis on sustainable development. We also focus on activities across the science policy interface, raise awareness, also activities that raise awareness and that disseminate knowledge. So this is just to give you a flavor of where we're at in terms of our annual call for proposals. So for example, for CRRP, between 2010 and 2018, if you were to apply to the APN for funding under our regional research program, you have about a 52% rate of success, which is actually a very good rate. But looking over at Capable, which is our capacity development program, the average is 65%. So particularly for early career scientists, I would really, in the Philippines, I'd really encourage you to talk to your mentors, to talk to your supervisors, and get engaged in some of our APN activities. So now that I've given you a flavor of what APN does, let me show you what APN has done in the past 5 years. APN is now moving into a new 5th strategic phase, and we're currently writing that 5th strategic phase. It's not going to differ too much from the current strategic phase, but I'd like to give you a flavor of what we have done and what we've achieved in the past 5 years. So, for example, this phrase diagram on the right really shows in the past 5 years our member country priority topics, and these really focused around climate change, sustainable development, climate change adaptation, and even looking down at disaster risk reduction and that sort of thing. So these climate impacts, so really resilience, impacts, adaptation, disaster reduction, all surrounding climate change has been very much a key focus for our member countries in the past 5 years. And in terms of numbers, in the past 4 years, we've provided funding for 120 projects. I'm really delighted to say that we're really reaching our goal of engaging more early career scientists, and this strategic phase, 70% of our projects engaged early career scientists. We engaged over 1,600 scientists. We have over 11,000 people directly engaged in APN, and over 900 distinct outputs, many of which are policy briefs, but most of which are peer-reviewed journal articles. Recently, we did a knowledge synthesis of some of our projects from 2013 to 2018, and it showed that in the region, in Asia particularly, there's 115 distinct and relevant projects in climate change, mostly in Southeast Asia, South Asia, and Temperate Asia. Many of them assert community-based adaptation and mitigation that surround issues on ecosystems and biodiversity, extreme weather events, water food energy nexus, sustainable waste management, and climate education. I'm really pleased to say that we just produced a paper on that. It's if you look at environmental research, I'm sure this presentation will be shared with you all. So please have a look at that paper and see the really intricate details of the results of that knowledge synthesis. So as we know, Asia is a hotspot of climate change impacts and of disasters, and it's really one of the most highly vulnerable regions in the world. Achieving sustainable development will entail climate change adaptation, mitigation, and APN really is committed to helping the region address these challenges brought about by climate change. And again, as you can see from our phrase cloud on the right here, climate change is a key focus of our work. So again, in the spirit of this particular session for the Philippines, I would really like to move into a focus on some of the work that we've been doing in the Philippines. So currently, APN conducted over the past 20 years or so, 470 projects. And I'm really delighted to say, after having done a little bit of the math, 148 projects actually engaged the Philippines. That makes me really happy, particularly mentioning this at this particular conference, and particularly knowing all of the participants, at least on Zoom. I can see the names on Zoom, and I know many of you have been engaged in APN activities. So keep coming back. Let's grow the Philippines network. I want to highlight just four activities at the moment. We have a comprehensive regional research project ongoing, which is on sustainable mangrove rehabilitation. Our regional research program does engage 3 countries, and this particular study in the Philippines. Oh my goodness, I only have 5 minutes left. Moving on, we have 2 incapable and post-typhoon disaster waste management and then rainwater harvesting technology, and our small grants program for early career scientists. Really pleased to say that the Philippines is engaged in a project on the inclusiveness in community resilience for flooding disaster. So I want to focus on one particular project that focused on local government units in the Philippines, enhancing climate risk resilience through human security development and capacity building in the province of Aurora in the Philippines. This particular project was an institutional capacity assessment, which was administered in 8 municipalities and the provincial government of Aurora. And it looked at various indicators representing access rights and entitlement, information flows, decision-making processes, etc. Some of the key results of this was the process of preparing local climate change action plans is a major challenge for LGUs in Aurora and the Philippines. Engaging LGUs in the activities reflected a shared learning process through knowledge generation and discussion. Institutional capacity assessment revealed a really strong correlation between expertise and position in all conditions. And moving on, a key to institutional capacity building is competency, developing among LGUs as frontline agencies in climate adaptive activities. This said, LGUs really need improvement in terms of staffing and human resources. They need access to financial support from other sources and data knowledge management systems. On the left-hand side there in the photo, you may recognize this wonderful gentleman. It's Professor Cruz, who was part of the project. And he is providing some information on the holistic approaches of the project. And this gentleman on the right is a representative of one of the local government units. These are some photos of some of the work that was conducted during the project. This one was particularly on the participatory risk and vulnerability assessment training for CDRA. And I really want to mention this pull quote. This is a really nice example of the science policy interface and capacity building coming together really nicely in one project at the local level. And it's nice to see a pull quote from Christina Wagen from PDRRMO of Aurora, who says it's the first province in the Philippines to craft LCCAP based from the LCCAP submitted by the municipalities. We are glad that UPLB chose the province of Aurora. And APN is very proud that UPLB submitted a proposal that allowed us to fund this particular activity. More of this activity you can see a recent publication by Lizelle Grifalda. I know that you're watching, Lizelle. Hello. And I'd like to highlight this particular paper. Well done, Liesel. And this paper offers so much more perspective into this particular project. On the science policy interface, yes, we work very, very diligently with IPCC through their AR6 assessment report. A special issue that we just published with 15 articles from 15 research projects focused in Asia was recently published, and it's climate change impacts, vulnerability and adaptation, an Asia perspective, and it's particularly targeted for IPCC AR6. We're hoping that with the second order draft coming up, that we will see some of these articles picked up in the particularly working group 10, working group 2, chapter 10, which is the chapter on Asia. You can see here the citation on the right. I would really encourage you to have a look at that. We work closely with UNFCCC through SUBSTA, through the Loss and Damage International Warsaw Mechanism, and through providing funds to member countries for the national determined contributions. We work closely with IPBES, and we work closely with, we focus a lot on the Sustainable Development Goals. We hope to do that more in the future, but currently 13, 14, and 15 have been our focus in the past few years. Leaving the best to last, I hope I've got the last 1 minute for this, but we really, one key priority for APN is to develop the capacity of early career professionals. And we've done this in the past 3 years by providing small grants for research programs. This was launched in 2016, where we funded, I think, 4 activities. And then it was funded again this year, and we provided 5 research and capacity building projects for scientists. For the 2016, one recipient from the Philippines was actually awarded one of these grants. We have proposal development training workshops. So again, if you're out there and you want to submit a proposal, you can be engaged in these proposal development training workshops that allow you to talk with your peers, gain collaboration, collaborate with your peers across the region, and also at the same time work with mentors in developing proposals for funding for submission for funding to the APN. We've conducted over 18 workshops since 2008, and we've trained over 300 early career scientists. You can see on the slide that we now focus our PDTWs at the sub-regional level, and our recent one was supposed to be held last November in Pakistan, but unfortunately the pandemic prevented us from holding that face-to-face. It is still on the cards. Our researchers are waiting, and we will more than likely move to a webinar-based PDTW for that. We also have our next scheduled one from Malaysia. So it covers Southeast Asia. So of course the Philippines is eligible to be applying for the PDTW. When we do have our intergovernmental meetings, we also engage or we promote early career scientists. They come, they have a poster session, and they're able to present their work to our government appointed scientific planning group members, other practitioners and policymakers from our member governments. So all of our activities really are these days targeting early career researchers. That's the future of sustainable development, of a sustainable world. So I really encourage, with this end slide, I really encourage all of our early career scientists out there listening into this presentation to contact the APN and become engaged. So with that, I would like to, again, promote our special issue on climate impact, vulnerability and adaptation from an Asian perspective. This is the link to that particular special issue. All of our information is found here on the left. And with that, thank you very much. Salamat, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Linda, for that very comprehensive presentation on the significant role played by APN in terms of advancing global change research through its collaborative regional programs, but also capacity development program, which actually has very important impacts, not only on its 22 member countries, but I would say beyond it because of its rippling effect. So with this, we know that we are running out of time. So we now move to the Q&A session of the second part, and I'll turn over the floor to my colleague, Dr. Dixon Hibanya, to facilitate the Q&A session.
Okay,
Dixon?
yes, thank you very much, Dr. John Pulhin, and I share gratitude for the excellent presentation of our panel presenters. Let us flash the first question. I think the first question is for Dr. Rex Cruz from Gil Mendoza. Dr. Gil Mendoza asked, climate change impacts each ecosystems individually or separately and systematically. What specific indicators were monitored to measure impacts to individual ecosystem? How about the broad system-based indicators? And then let me just go through to a related question from Dr. Diaz. Among the different ecosystems you have shown, which of them is the most vulnerable to climate change? Likewise, the most resilient one. Any quantitative indicators to measure the vulnerability and resiliency of the ecosystems against climate change? Dr. Cruz, your recognized.
Yes, thank you very much for the question. Very difficult questions to answer, but let me address first the questions of Dr. Gil Mendoza. Uh, uh, the specific indicators that were monitored to measure impacts to individual ecosystems included, for instance, habitat quality. You know, the quality of particular natural habitats, whether it pertains to integrity of the natural vegetation cover. You know, so we looked at fragmentation, for instance. We did fragmentation analysis and then tried to relate this to human activities. Plus, of course, we were not able to go down yet on the combined impacts of climate change and human activities on fragmentation of natural vegetation, for instance. So, and then we also, we also had indicators measured to allow us to understand the impacts on the landscape, on the landscape unit basis, looking at the landscape functions. We did that. We were looking at, for instance, what will be the specific what will be, a good method of assessing the health of ecosystems and the health of watershed and the health of the landscape. But we were not able to go there. As we were not to go as far as that because what we effectively we only had 1 year of continuous monitoring, and then the project was already stopped on its track. And yeah, but those were where we were going to trying to analyze the impacts on the functions of ecosystems and functions of the landscape unit. But unfortunately, we were not able to get fresh funding to continue on with the monitoring so that we can gather enough information to be able to say, yeah, these are how ecosystems and these are how a landscape affect or respond to changes in climate, changes in human activities. Now moving on to the question of Dr. Diaz. Again, by by virtue of the limited observations that we conduct during the 2 year, program duration, it is really difficult to say, on the basis of our findings, on the basis of empirical data, which of the different ecosystems are the most resilient and which ones are the most vulnerable. We know, all we know is that when we try to relate, for instance, ecosystems that are um, heavily disturbed by human activities compared to a similar ecosystem which is not so much disturbed by human activities. We were foreseeing that um, we were foreseeing that the more less disturbed ecosystems, is more vulnerable and more at risk to climate change. But again, as I said, it's very difficult for us to substantiate that hypothesis. But we were moving there, but unfortunately, we didn't gather enough data over the limited duration of the program. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Cruz, and also for the question of Dr. Mendoza and Diaz. Let's move on to the next question. Yeah, this is also from Dr. Mendoza to Dr. Lasco. Identifying and analyzing climate change-induced factors affecting virus spread like COVID-19 and other possible virus or pandemic, I think would be a good contribution of OML. I'm not sure what the state of science is with respect to the impacts of climate change to epidemiology of virus spread. Do you think we have adequate and credible scientific studies on climate change impacts to epidemiology of viral diseases, which we can share or communicate to the public? Dr. Lasco.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mendoza, for that question. Our Philippine Climate Change Assessment Report, which I showed earlier and is available free for download in our website, has a chapter on health, the impacts of climate change on health. And if I remember right, there was a study conducted on dengue, but not on the virus itself, but on the vector, the mosquitoes, and how dengue may spread as a result of warming environment. And there was, if I remember right, some correlation analyses of certain temperature and climate variables and correlating those with the spread of dengue. And again, from what I'm just from recall, I think they found out that the warmer the environment, then the higher the incidence of dengue is. But other than that, I don't know if there are other studies on viral. I'm just talking about viral and the the spread of these diseases. I think we need more of those. Our medical doctors and scientists need to, I think, step up and do some more, or a lot more, on these types of studies. Thank you for the question.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Lasco. Now let's move on to the next question. Okay, to Dr. Stevenson, also from Dr. Mendoza. Can you give a sense of the range of funding levels that APN can or has supported? Any funding limits, caps for CRRP, capable and small grants?
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Mendoza, for your question. Yes, I can give a sense of the range of funding. Funding is modest. For a comprehensive regional research program, we can fund a research project for up to 3 years. And usually our funding limit is around $45,000 per year. So you can count that as $135 for a 3-year research project. For capable, of course, the CRRP has to engage at least 3 countries, 2 of which must be developing countries. For capable, we can have 1 country activities focusing on capacity building. And our limit for capable is usually around $40,000 per year, with projects up to 2 years for capable. For our small grants program, this still is kind of, it started in 2016 as a kind of pilot program. And in our first round, we offered around $15,000. And it's amazing what early career scientists can provide with such a small, modest amount of funds. And we have some very nice outputs. The recent 2019 call for our small grants program for early career scientists, we offered, I think, around $30,000 for 5 projects. Ultimately, we had around $120,000 to spend. Probably in the future, any such activities won't be standalone for these small grants programs. What we will probably do in the future in our fifth strategic phase is move these kinds of activities under our CRRP program and under our capable program, but they certainly will continue to exist in some form in the future. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Stevenson. You also notice there's a raised hand in our attendees. Dr. Lansigan, do you have a question? You are recognized. Oh, Dr. Lansigan is muted. All right. Okay, while waiting for Dr. Lansigan, there are follow-up questions for Dr. Lasco. Yeah, from Christmas Okiyama. You have mentioned that OML act as advisor of some business sectors in the Philippines, such as covering the OML group of companies. I am interested to know your thoughts on how interested businesses in developing economies are when it comes to supporting climate change and resilience. And what advice can you give to approach companies and collaborate with them? Also, how to sustain partnership and support by them.
Thank you, Dixon, and thank you, Christmas, for this question. And well, first of all, I think there's a huge interest amongst private companies right now on climate. Almost all the major companies in the Philippines, not just the Lopez group of companies. I'm thinking about Ayala group of companies, the SM group of companies. Most of those companies realize that climate change and climate impacts or climate hazards, like, of course, typhoons, very common in the Philippines, is affecting the way they do business. For example, take insurance. Because of the rising incidence of climate risks and hazards, insurance is getting more expensive. And so they need to be more resilient. They need to do more in order to reduce damage coming from these cyclones and climate extremes. Note also that a lot of these companies have investors from other countries, investors from the US, from Singapore, Australia, and so on. And these investors are demanding greater climate action in terms of mitigation, but also, of course, in terms of adaptation. And finally, even their own consumers are demanding climate action. Consumers are more now sensitive to clean energy, to more, less plastics, and all the things that are affecting also climate and climate change. And so I think, especially the bigger players out there, they are very conscious both of climate mitigation and climate adaptation. And so they are very open. So how to partner with them? Well, typically they have their own sustainability officers. Some will have their own climate, perhaps climate officers, but mainly perhaps approaching sustainability officers and managers like those, and initiating dialogues with them. And I think they'll be very open. And so how to sustain this partnership? Well, you have to deliver, of course, what they need. You have to be able. By the way, please note that we're not really sort of like an arm of the corporate world providing, just servicing them. No, our center is really trying to service the Filipino people or the Filipino society, especially the most vulnerable. It's only a tiny fraction of our work that we provide advisories to our corporate partners. But really, our main work is trying to devise solutions for the most vulnerable people of our country using science. But yes, I would say, please go ahead and continue to work with private sector. They're more open than ever before in climate change type of issues. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rodel, for a positive answer or response. Is Dr. Lansigan?
Yes, yes.
Okay, yes,
Good
yes. Please go
morning.
ahead, Dr. Lansigan.
Congratulations to my colleague Rodel, Rex, and Joey, and the rest of the speakers, including Linda. My question is, well, maybe answered by any one of the speakers. Environmental monitoring should be made a component of local government units in local government planning and implementation. Can you suggest, based on your experience, how this can be facilitated or implemented by the LGUs so that it will be more sustainable? Thank you.
Rex, that's probably for you first.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks, for the no, for the good question. In our program, the Modisera program, we actually engage local communities and local government units, realizing that they have the presence in our observation stations, and therefore we tried to we started actually trying to get them interested to be part of the monitoring activities, and we did so in some of our project sites. And whether they can be good monitors or not, we were not able to see that. But as to the interests of local government units and local communities, it was there in some of our sites, at least where we were actively, seeking the participation of the local government units and local communities. Can it be done? I think it can be done. I think LGUs can be trained, and I have seen LGUs investing in these kinds of activities, which is above and beyond what their usual concerns are. We have local government units that have hired, for instance, additional personnel to conduct and continue on with our extension activities to upland communities, and we saw that in two LGUs. So, insofar as monitoring is concerned, I think it can be done. It can be done. It just takes additional investment on the part of local government units, and it takes a little more capacity build, well, not a little more, but significant capacity building, knowing that the LGUs really don't have much of the technical capacities required for monitoring. But yes, given the resources, I think LGUs should be, as well as private sector should be, as well as those big government corporations who have jurisdiction, for instance, over watershed management and over large areas of the natural forest. I think they should be required, because now only very few of them are actually doing it. And I can cite some companies like related to what Rodel was saying, the Lopez group of companies, they're doing that. But it must be a required, to most private and local government entities.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Sir Rodel, would you like to respond as well to that question?
No more. I think Rex already. I don't know about Linda. Thank you, Enoch, for the question.
Thank you, Dr. Ian Lansigan, for the question. Okay, one last question for Dr. Rex. This is from Dr. Afwan. Congratulations for your Modesera monitoring project. I believe it should continue. It seems that the bats were your favorite models for disease transmission on viral transmission. But monitoring impact change, environmental changes shouldn't the more vulnerable groups like amphibians be the better environment indicators to be monitored? Dr. Dr. Rex, you are muted. Kindly please unmute your Zoom.
Thank you very much, Dr. Afwang, for the question. Yes, you are very correct. Amphibians are they are group. I mean, they are good indicators actually of impacts, particularly of climate change. You know, the drying up, the heating up of the environment. You know, they are very sensitive to those, and we were actually looking at those groups of wildlife. You know, during our program, and and yes, you know, there are others. For instance, we also looked at small organisms, you know, found in rivers, the macrobenthos, you know, and so on. Okay, so we tried to look at them as well. They are, you know, to our sense, a good indicator of impacts of human activities and impacts of changing climatic conditions. Yes, these are, you know, you actually you know, mentioned one of the more likely indicators of impacts of environment. I just saw, you know, Dixon, let me respond to the question, to the query of, I mean, to the issue concern of Dr. Marian de Los Angeles, because I
Yes,
saw
sir.
that
Yes, sir.
on top of Dr. Afwang's question. She was actually, yeah, she was actually suggesting that if Moody's is to be revived, you know, it should directly support the Philippine systems of environment and economic accounts where valuation of economic services are planned to be continued in the future. Actually, that's very true, Dr. Marian. You know, it was actually one directions that we were taking, that you know, we can, and those how do you call that, valuation of economic services was actually one of the modules of our decision support system that were to come out of the outputs of this program. And yeah, this is, you know, this is really you know, this is really one of the outcomes, you know, of Moody's monitoring activities could have actually generated.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Cruz, and to Dr. Huang and Dr. Marian. It's now 11:17, and I'm going to wrap up this Q&A session. So thank you very much for our panel presenters for the excellent responses, and to those who asked questions. So those questions that were not you know, mentioned, we're going to collate them, and we're going to forward them to the panel speakers for their response. So I'm going to turn over now the floor to the host, Dr. Jan Pauline. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dixon, for the excellent facilitation. Just to wrap up everything, we did a simple word cloud analysis using en vivo tool of the different presentations. And here is a snapshot of the word cloud that we were able to generate. And using this as a take-home message, I would say that the prominence of the words climate change and research in the word cloud affirms that addressing climate change remains to be a major challenge in the field of environment and atmospheric sciences. It also reiterates the important role of research or scientific advancement as an initial and necessary step in addressing this challenge. On the other hand, the prominence of other keywords such as human impacts, resilience, and capacity implies to me the need to move from science to action to reduce the human impacts of climate change and other environmental problems and build resilience in the process. It also highlights the important role of capacity development as a key strategy in achieving climate resilient development. Finally, the prominence of keywords such as Philippines, Asia, global, and even Malaysia indicates that atmospheric and environmental problems cut across geographic boundaries and therefore need to be addressed simultaneously at all scales to reduce their adverse impacts. We hope that this parallel session has provided many of us additional knowledge and steered our interest in the fields of environmental and atmospheric sciences. We also expect that it can open opportunities for collaborative undertakings among the Philippine and foreign-based speakers and participants, not only in terms of joint researches, but also other mutually beneficial actions that can help address pressing environmental challenges and build human and environmental resilience towards a better world. With this, we want to express our deepest gratitude to all our distinguished presenters for sharing their valuable knowledge and time that make this parallel session truly a successful one. Even at this time, we are still have 102 participants online via Zoom. On behalf of the President of PAASE, Dr. Gisela P. Concepcion, and my co-host, Dr. Dixon T. Hebanya, we want to express our deepest thanks to the UPLB Information Technology Center through its staff, Dr. John Eric Dao, also the PAASE 8.2 Parallel Session Secretariat, namely Mili Pangilinan, Wela Catujo, and Bea Evaristo for their support to make this parallel session truly a successful one. So thank you all for your participation, and we hope that you have learned something from this particular session. Before we finally end, we would like to request all the participants, all the presenters to turn on their video for a short picture taking. And finally, before we do that, let me also inform or respond to those who are asking whether PowerPoint presentations will be available. We will request our presenters, if they are willing to share their PowerPoint presentation, probably in PDF format, and we will be posting them at the PAASE website. But let me inform our participants also that we have recorded the proceedings of this parallel session. We will have a quick edit on it, and it will be posted also at the PAASE parallel session. So those who are asking for a certificate of participation, we can send a participation upon your request. So again, thank you very much, and good day to everyone. So can we now request all the presenters for a pause? And probably some of us will be, the secretariat will be taking our photo. Is somebody taking it?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I would say 1, 2, 5. I request that all the other staff, secretariat also join the photo for the last photograph. So please turn on your screen. John, do you want to join us?
No, sir, I don't have a webcam. I'm using my computer.
Okay, sorry. Okay.
1, 2, 3.
Thank you so much. So, bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
By the way, we will send you our certificate of appreciation.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks a lot.
Bye.
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 All right. Thanks, sir.
Thank you, Dix, and thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Meron ba sa inyo marunong mag-edit ng video? Hindi ko alam kung anong tatanggalin, kung anong kung paano ba i-edit 'yon.
Sige po sir, i-edit na lang po namin soon.
Subukan nyo pagka nakuha natin sa IPC.
Apa.
Nagre-record pa tayo, no? Or still we recording? Okay. All right.
Thank you so much, ha?
Thanks.